Think your standard of living is not the same as it used to be? You're right about that. Americans have lost over a third of their purchasing power in the last decade, and the biggest share of that loss happened in the past 3 years. For millions of retirees and workers reaching retirement age in 2023, inflation and the rising cost of living have been particularly detrimental. While many Generation Z, Millennial, and Generation X households were forced to downsize their life to make ends meet, older Americans, some of whom had already retired, are being forced to come back to the workforce as they can no longer afford their basic expenses. Even those who saved and did everything right throughout their working years face the risk of financial insecurity in retirement, especially as we march toward another recession. This problem is growing worse with each passing generation, and eventually it'll hit the lives of each and every one of us in the United States. Today, we compiled a series of facts and stats that expose the brutally honest truth about this worrying crisis and why most people won't be able to retire at 65. But before moving on, we kindly ask you to support our work with a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next videos. The standard of living for Americans has fallen longer and more steeply over the past 3 years than at any time since the U.S. government began recording this data in 2007. Since 1971, the U.S. dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power, with 35% of that loss happening between 2013 and 2023. But since the onset of the pandemic, things have taken a drastic turn for the worse. In a span of only 3 years, the average American has lost on average $1,806 in annual disposable income due to the rapid rise in the cost of living, which made the cost of housing, car loans, gasoline, and food jump at the fastest pace in nearly 5 decades. Despite recent increases in hourly wages, when adjusting the current median income to today's cost of living, the vast majority of American workers, about 73%, have actually taken a pay cut. Now, people must spend a larger share of their salaries to afford the basics, and they're left with little to no money for discretionary purchases, and more importantly, to save for retirement. Low and middle-income earners have been squeezed the most, and according to data provided by the Pew Research Center, 58% of individuals earning between $25,000 to $75,000 annually say they have had to downsize their lives since 2020 to be able to get by. That development marked the most dramatic drop in the U.S. standard of living since at least 1970, even surpassing the figure seen during the Great Recession, when 47% of Americans in those income groups said the same. According to Sentia Research, the pandemic-induced economic downturn and the inflationary crisis that followed resulted in a median income drop of 9.8% when adjusting to the current macroeconomic factors. Although government officials cite declining inflation as a sign of economic growth, many important components of the Consumer Price Index continue rising and reaching record levels, including grocery prices. In a growing economy, one would expect Americans' disposable income to be rising, but it has flattened out at a low level, says economist Bob Ruska of Fact and Opinion Economics in New York. For retirees, the situation has been a living nightmare. Data from the National Institute on Retirement Security reveals that 44% of older Americans who retired in the past 3 years have gone back to work due to a lack of savings. The Bureau of Labor Statistics published figures showing the number of people in the labor force who were 75 and older grew 53.7% from 2012 to 2022 and is projected to grow 96.5% between 2023 and 2033. It's such a dramatic increase that this is the only age group projected to increase its share of the workforce from 8.9% in 2020 to nearly 14% in 2030. The truth is that many seniors didn't have the retirement savings they thought they have, and that's because they're not expecting the cost of living to rise so much so fast. That's especially the case for those who didn't have the coveted jobs with defined benefit pensions or 401k matching programs. A report by the Joint Economic Committee shows that only 35% of Americans between the ages of 55 and 64 have a pension or retirement savings held in a 401k or IRA. To put it in perspective, the recommended savings for retirement is 6 times one's current income at age 50. However, even among those Americans between 55 and 64 who do have retirement savings, the median account balance is just $54,000, the report found. The problem is that working well past the age of 65 is not an option for millions of seniors facing a retirement savings shortfall. For instance, people who work in delivery, construction, janitorial, caregiving, nursing, and farming jobs are often not physically able to continue to work beyond traditional retirement age, the researchers noted. Others might have to leave work to take on caregiving duties, and although professionals with college degrees are better positioned to keep working, they account for only 45.7% of the U.S. workforce. Though working longer may help mitigate today's growing retirement insecurity, it's not a viable solution to the retirement crisis, write the report's authors. Policymakers should support higher quality jobs for older workers, while also ensuring that those who are no longer able to work can retire with financial security, they stressed. Unfortunately, that change may not happen in our lifetime. Social Security funds may dry up before the end of the decade, and financial volatility has wiped out roughly 28% of 401k accounts since 2021. These determinants are only increasing the chance that more Americans will face financial insecurity in their retirement years. About 61% of Americans aged 65 to 75 who came back to the labor force in recent years say they're not confident they'll have enough money to cover basic monthly expenses if they stop working, NIRS data reveals. Meanwhile, 51% of consumers between 45 and 75 feel they do not have enough retirement savings to last their lifetime. The Institute estimates that 27 million people nearing retirement age will see a drop in their standard of living in retirement. That's also what researchers with the Boston College Center for Retirement Research predict will happen to most U.S. households. At least 50% of the 55.8 million Americans aged 65 or more will be unable to maintain their previous standard of living once they reach retirement, even if they work until the age of 65. About half of today's households will not have enough retirement income to support their pre-retirement standard of living, even if they work to age 65 and annuitize all their financial assets, including the receipts from a reverse mortgage on their homes, the expert said. The robustness of the results confirms the retirement saving issue faced by today's working-age households, and that we need to fix our retirement system so that employer plan coverage is universal. Continuous coverage is the only way workers will be able to accumulate an adequate level of resources to maintain the standard of living they've grown accustomed to before retiring, the study concludes. But when analyzing the hard numbers, it becomes shockingly clear that most American workers are sleepwalking to poverty. An April survey conducted by the Alliance for Lifetime Income, ALI, a nonprofit consumer organization that educates Americans on how to protect their retirement, indicates that Americans from all income groups and generations will be at risk of running out of money in their retirement. The survey's findings highlight that the forgotten generation faces a dismal retirement future. The typical Generation X household, for those born between 1965 and 1980, has around $40,000 saved for retirement, while the bottom half of savers only have a few thousand banked. Of course, Generation X isn't the only generation that could face retirement trouble. U.S. Census data found that nearly half of baby boomers and more than half of all workers have zero savings for their future. Opinion polling released in May also found that just 39% of Americans expect to live a comfortable retirement, marking a 17% decrease from 2019 levels. Moreover, an analysis by Wealth Wizards exposed that since January 2021, 1 in 3 savers have moved from an expected moderate retirement lifestyle to a minimum lifestyle. Adam Koval is one of them. He knows exactly how the squeeze feels. After retiring in 2018 and losing a large chunk of his savings due to an unexpected medical bill, Mr. Koval came back to the labor force in 2023. Now working at a school cafeteria, Mr. Koval earns 28% less than at his last job. He and his wife are having to buy cheaper foods and reduce their gasoline consumption to have enough money to cover their needs. My mom was hoping her kids would lead a better life than her, but so far that has not happened, says Koval. In Pompano, Florida, some stretched seniors end up at the Blessings Food Pantry, which is associated with Christchurch United Methodist. We have quite a few grandparents who are raising their grandchildren using their savings, feeding them, and buying clothes for them when they can't afford to do that for themselves, says Yvonne Womack, the team leader. Others, she says, are foregoing food to pay for their medical prescriptions. And then there is your ordinary senior, whose Social Security check has not gone up in the last several years. But food and gasoline prices have skyrocketed, she says. Younger generations are starting to save for retirement later than financial experts advise. When they get close to their retirement years, they may have even fewer savings than baby boomers and Generation X's, which may perpetuate a cycle of financial insecurity. The dream of retiring at the age of 65 will be just that for most Americans. Each generation is getting poorer than the one before as the U.S. middle class continues to shrink. With fewer good-paying jobs around, planning for a secure financial future remains out of the reality of many people who are struggling to make ends meet right now. This means we will only have 2 choices, and none of them are good. Either we work until we die, or we risk facing poverty in our senior years, even after an entire lifetime dedicated to our jobs. At the end of the day, this is a reflection of the decay of the American economy and major proof that our retirement system desperately needs to be fixed.